There are some devilishly talented teenage players in the Premier League right now, from versatile Arsenal and England star Bukayo Saka to the informed Mason Greenwood at Manchester United. Following the latter's goal in Manchester United's 1-0 win against Wolves at the weekend, I saw someone begging the question on Twitter of whether he is the greatest teenage player that the Premier League has ever seen. To which, the answer is no. He is very good, and I like him a lot, but by no measure is he the finest teenage footballer of the Premier League era. That got me thinking about who is though, and then who is in each position, and by the time I got lost far enough down that rabbit hole, I figured I might as well prevent it from being time wasted and turn it into a video. So that is exactly what I have done. There's going to be an 11, a bench, some honourable mentions, and I'll share my views on who I think are the 3 finest teenage footballers of the Premier League era. It's worth noting that our minds can deceive us, and some players who I, and I'm sure many of you, felt were blockbuster stars in their teens, actually made their debuts at maybe 18, but only actually played a handful of games before turning 20, after which their careers suddenly went stratospheric. Likewise, some players who I wouldn't have had down to feature before getting into the weeds of researching this video turn out to have very good arguments in their favour, but I'll try to explain my decision in both cases as we go through. Inclusions are based solely on the quality and quantity of their performances and appearances in the Premier League before turning 20. Without further ado then, who was a teenage superstar but not in the Premier League of course, here is my ultimate Premier League teenage 11. Goalkeeper, Chris Kirkland. Okay, so I'm just going to come out and say it, there has never been a truly world-class teenage goalkeeper in the Premier League, as there has been with someone like HITC Sevens in La Liga, or more recently with Gianluigi Donnarumma in Serie A. My first thoughts were Joe Hart and Paul Robinson, but Hart only actually made 1 Premier League appearance before turning 20, and Robinson only made 5, with both players, and particularly Hart, rarely coming to the fore in their early 20s. Whilst he is not quite HITC Sevens or Gianluigi Donnarumma, to put it mildly, when you look at it objectively, Chris Kirkland stands out head and shoulders above anyone else, as is so often the case in real life, given the fact that the Englishman is 6 foot 6 inches tall. Kirkland came through the youth ranks at Coventry City, and as a 19-year-old, he made 23 appearances for the Sky Blues in the Premier League. Though Coventry were relegated that season, Kirkland was excellent, even winning the club's Players' Player of the Year award following his breakthrough. He joined Liverpool the following summer, but he could never quite break through at Anfield, and he ended up playing his best football in the Premier League for Wigan Athletic. Right back, Trent Alexander-Arnold. There are a large number of candidates at right back, including Micah Richards, who burst onto the scene at Manchester City as a 17-year-old. In spite of considerable competition, who I will come to with the bench and honourable mentions, there could only be one winner, and that man is Trent Alexander-Arnold. Parachuted into Jurgen Klopp's starting 11 due to an injury to Nathaniel Klein, Alexander-Arnold made his Premier League debut 2 months after his 18th birthday. It is worth stressing that it was at the age of 20 in the 2018-19 season that Alexander-Arnold really began to kick on and started recording ridiculous assist numbers. Nonetheless, he did start that season at the age of 19, and he did make over 30 appearances in the Premier League before turning 20, already exhibiting great confidence in his own ability to get up and down the right flank and to deliver dangerous balls into the box. Centre-back, Rio Ferdinand. Whilst the decision of who partners him was a hotly contested one, Rio Ferdinand's starting berth within this 11 was among the most guaranteed of anyone's. A man who broke the British record transfer fee twice before he had even turned 24, Rio Ferdinand was part of a very talented contingent of academy players at West Ham United in the mid-1990s. Ferdinand made his Premier League debut in May 1996, aged 17, becoming an integral part of the West Ham team at 18 and their best player in truth by 19. In the 1997-98 season, which started when Ferdinand was 18 and ended when he was 19, and in which he made 46 appearances in all competitions, the Englishman won the Hammer of the Year award and became a regular for the England national team. A phenomenal centre-back, there have been few finer at that age and in that position worldwide during the last 30 years. So Ferdinand's inclusion was never in any doubt whatsoever. Centre-back, Jonathan Woodgate. There were 4 or 5 strong candidates to partner Rio Ferdinand, including the likes of Robert Huth, who was getting regular game time in a Chelsea team that finished second in the Premier League in his teens, and Phil Jones, who was a titan at the back for Blackburn Rovers and later a regular under Alex Ferguson at Old Trafford at that age. In the end, I went for a centre-back who did actually play alongside Rio Ferdinand at Leeds United in real life and alongside him with England on a handful of occasions. Leeds United's academy was fairly prolific in churning out talent in the late 90s and early 2000s, but few academy graduates excited the club more than Jonathan Woodgate. A really complete centre-back who is cruelly remembered by some for his disastrous Real Madrid debut and repeated injury struggles, Woodgate was fantastic when fit, even in his teens. He had a season and a half of first-team football in a top 4 team at Leeds United before turning 20, as well as being a full England international, and I think he would form a terrific teenage centre-back partnership alongside Rio. Left-back, Luke Shaw. There is not as much choice at left-back as there was at right-back, though I would give a very honourable mention to Wayne Bridge, along with current Premier League teenager Bukayo Saka, who played a little bit of football there for Arsenal when he first broke through. Like Wayne Bridge, Luke Shaw spent his teenage years at Southampton, making his first-team debut at 16 and his Premier League debut at 17. Shaw almost immediately nailed down a starting berth, which he retained until joining Manchester United for a then world record fee for a teenager of £30 million in 2014. The 76 top-flight league appearances that Shaw made at St Mary's and Old Trafford as a teenager is the 6th most of any player during the Premier League era, and he even made the PFA Team of the Year at left-back while still in his teens. So, he had to start. Central midfield, Cesc Fabregas. One of the greatest teenage footballers, not just in the history of the Premier League, but in the history of world football, I don't think an awful lot of people fully appreciate just how special Cesc Fabregas was, especially for a player in his position at that age. We sometimes see wingers and forwards break through at 17 or 18 and set the world alight. But for a midfielder at that age to be dictating the tempo of a game, that is basically unheard of. Cesc Fabregas is one of only 2 players to have registered more than 100 appearances in the Premier League as a teenager, enjoying 3 full seasons of regular first-team football before the age of 20. Fabregas won the Golden Boy Award, Arsenal's Player of the Year award, and made both the Premier League and UEFA Teams of the Year in his teenage years, which is just simply phenomenal. He waltzes into midfield as one of the first names on this team sheet. Central midfield, Jack Wilshere. It's an all-Arsenal, or at least all-Arsenal during their teenage years partnership, in central midfield, as Jack Wilshere partners Cesc Fabregas. Wilshere's inclusion is a much more contentious one, based upon only my criteria, which was quality and quantity of performances during their teenage years. And I say that since Jack Wilshere only actually played 1 full season of first-team football at Arsenal during his teens. That means plenty of midfielders played more games, but Wilshere was so good during that season, and at that age, that I felt he had to feature. It was the 2010-11 season, which began when Wilshere was just 18, that Wilshere was really remarkable. He played 49 games in all competitions, 35 in the Premier League, and he won the PFA Young Player of the Year award, he made the PFA Team of the Year, and he won Arsenal's Player of the Year award. Injury ruled him out for the entirety of the following season and would go on to ravage one of English football's most promising talent's career. But for his ability in his teenage years, Wilshere has to feature. Attacking midfield, Joe Cole. We're going back a little while here, and a lot of people, myself included, won't actually be old enough to fully remember watching Joe Cole's breakthrough in real time. Another graduate of the West Ham youth ranks, the self-entitled Academy of Football, Joe Cole is perhaps the most gifted English player to emerge during my lifetime. And whilst that might seem like an outlandish claim, if you go back and watch Joe Cole during his early years at West Ham, you might well be won over as well. Cole had the best part of 3 years as a first-team regular at Upton Park before turning 20, catching the eye through his ability on the ball, his creativity, and his confidence. Cole later signed for Chelsea, where Jose Mourinho pushed him out wide, rather than playing him through the middle in a more free role, where he played his most expressive and expansive football, Cole still went on to have a very successful career, but given his raw ability in his teens, there will always be a feeling that he could have achieved more and that other countries might have nurtured him a little bit better. Right-sided forward, Michael Owen. It's little surprise that the star men in this 11 arrive in the forward areas, and an outstanding case could be made for Michael Owen being the finest teenage Premier League player of all time. Absolutely terrifying to play against when he first broke through at Liverpool, Owen arguably peaked at 18 or 19, at least in terms of his all-round game, though he would later become even more prolific. A pure phenomenon for England from schoolboy level up to the under-21s, Owen went to the World Cup in 1998 as an 18-year-old, and scored, arguably, England's greatest ever World Cup goal against Argentina. Owen holds the record for the most goals scored by a teenager in the Premier League with 46, and in truth, it isn't even close. His pace, finishing, creativity, and sheer self-belief during his teenage years made Owen practically unplayable, and he won the Premier League Golden Boot twice before he had even turned 20, which is absurd. Centre forward, Robbie Fowler. Back at Anfield, whilst Michael Owen stands out head and shoulders as the highest scoring Premier League teenager, the man who trails him by a margin of 11 goals is Robbie Fowler. I've seen arguments in favour of Fowler being an even greater talent at that age than Owen, and whilst I don't quite buy into that, you could certainly argue that he was a more instinctive finisher who played with the attacking movement of a seasoned professional already at the age of 18. It is worth noting that though Fowler scored 35 Premier League goals in his teens, he also played far fewer games than Owen, and he scored 18 goals in all competitions at the age of 18, as well as an incredible 31 in all competitions at 19. Obviously, there was plenty of competition in this position, but playing up front and through the middle, Fowler is my main man. Left-sided forward, Wayne Rooney. The man who holds the record for making the most Premier League appearances as a teenager, Wayne Rooney registered 105 appearances for Everton and Manchester United before turning 20, which is one more than Cesc Fabregas made for Arsenal. Rooney is the third highest scoring teenager in the Premier League era, behind Owen and Fowler. And you could argue that by picking those three as my front three, I am possibly the laziest person in the world. But I can assure you that wasn't my only justification. Rooney announced himself to the Premier League with a wonder goal against Arsenal, which flew past David Seaman, before announcing himself to the Champions League with a hat-trick against Fenerbahce for Manchester United. Rooney probably peaked at 25, the season after Cristiano Ronaldo left Manchester United, but there was something about a teenage Rooney that was even more exciting to watch. At that age, he was incredibly quick, aggressive, and explosive. Every time he picked up the ball, you just felt as though something special was going to happen. And in a star-studded England team at Euro 2004, an 18-year-old Wayne Rooney was still England's star man. And were it not for his injury at that tournament, who knows how far the three lions could have gone. The bench for my Premier League Teenage 11 reads Espen Bardson as backup to Chris Kirkland, Phil Jones covering at centre-back, and indeed full-back I suppose, Micah Richards, bursting onto the scene, primarily as a right-back, though he could also deputise at centre-back of course, Gareth Barry, in holding or central midfield, who made a whopping 87 Premier League appearances for Aston Villa in his teenage years, and was already one of the club's star players, Dele Alli ahead of him, who only had one season in the Premier League as a teenager, but he was outstanding at Tottenham, hitting double figures for goals from midfield, and forming a fabulous relationship with Harry Kane, Cristiano Ronaldo, who had 18 months of first-team football in England before turning 20, and though it was at 21 or 22 that he really started to produce world-class performances, he was already a regular in a fantastic team as 18, and Raheem Sterling, a man who has, quite incredibly, hit double figures for goals for 8 successive seasons at the age of only 26, having burst through very young at Liverpool, where he enjoyed 2.5 sensational seasons before turning 20. Honourable mentions go to the likes of James Milner, Nicolas Anelka, Mason Greenwood, Bukayo Saka, Raphael, Glenn Johnson, Richard Dunn, Robert Huth, Neda Manua, Joe Gomez, Sol Campbell, Wayne Bridge, Jack Rodwell, Frank Lampard, Theo Walcott, Marcus Rashford, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, Aaron Lennon, Michael Carrick, and Phil Neville. I should point out, just on the off chance that any of you might be wondering, that John Terry, as with a few players, though he made his Premier League debut very young, I believe at 18, he only actually played a handful of games before turning 20. Sol Campbell, who did play a full season of football for Spurs at the age of 19, may have featured were it not for the fact that he spent that season as a utility player covering at right back and at left back rather than in his favoured and eventual position at centre back. In response to the matter that I began the introduction discussing, I think the question of who is the greatest teenage Premier League player of all time comes down to a toss-up between Cesc Fabregas and Michael Owen, and I really think that you could take your pick between those two, with Wayne Rooney as a close third behind them. So that is it for today's video, but I hope you enjoyed it. If that was the case, hit the like button. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, as always, and make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens because it's an absolutely fantastic channel. At least that's what I've been hearing from a lot of people. You can also find me on Instagram and on Twitter by the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.